in Turkey at the behest of publishers, and I visited Diyarbakir, Mardin, and I talked with some university students in Mardin in southeast Anatolia, that part of Turkey which is essentially Kurdish. I became very well aware of some of the ideas which you were talking about, the co-presidency, the mayor. There is not one mayor of Diyarbakir, there are two, and I have to say I met many people from the Kurdish women's movement, and frankly it's one of the most impressive women's movements I've ever encountered. Absolutely astonishing in terms of both its politics, but I think its capacity to be active, participating, and militarily, as you saw from the short film, a lot of the military apparatus in Rojava is caught up with the gender question, and the leadership comes from the women. Being kind of theoretical as I am, I was aware of the transformation of the PKK from a Marxist-Leninist organization to one that was espousing the ideas of Mari Bookchin, who was a one-time anarchist, Marxist. I'd always had some considerable interest in his writings, knew him just a little bit, and was very excited to find that there was a political movement that was prepared to take up some of his ideas about municipal libertarianism, confederal socialism, and put them into practice through the councils and assembly structures that had been described as operating in Rojava. Some of these institutions, the Kurdish population have been attempting to implement in Turkey itself, but under conditions of considerable repression. I knew, of course, about the incredible destruction that had occurred in Kobani and Rojava in general, that you were dealing with physical infrastructure that was 60-70% destroyed. There was a map even published in the New York Times sometimes back, which actually from the air gave you a good idea of the amount of destruction that had occurred. And it was partly for that reason that I was very interested in what was going on in terms of reconstruction. And I tried to get into Rojava last May. I was prevented from doing so by the Turkish government. And this, I think, symbolizes, of course, one of the big issues in Rojava, which is the intense hostility of the Turkish government to what is happening there, and the attempt, by any means possible, to frustrate both the reconstruction effort, but also to frustrate the flow of information. And I think that one of the things that is very peculiar is that the United States, with its drone strikes and from the air, was supporting the YPG in Rojava in the fight against ISIS, and actually in the fight against ISIS, I think it's true to say that the only successful campaign against them has been the one which was organized and waged by the Kurdish population of Rojava. And it did rely somewhat on support from the United States, but there is considerable evidence that Turkey was supporting ISIS. So here is the weird situation that you find yourself in that part of the world. And we know that the Turkish administration has stirred up a great deal of concern about the Kurds within Turkey as part of the last electoral strategy, which unfortunately seems to have worked to some degree anyway in terms of the election results in Turkey. But I think one of the things we can do here in this country is to put pressure on our own administration, to put very, very strong pressure on Turkey to back off and to do something very, very different in relationship to what is happening in Rojava. The Turks, of course, are very concerned, particularly about the situation in what is called northern Kurdistan and southeast Anatolia, that a strong autonomous region in Syria would actually merge with a strong autonomous region in southeast Turkey, and therefore there's a very big threat as far as Turkey is concerned to sovereignty. But it's at this point that the question of how Kurdish autonomy is going to be worked out becomes rather critical. And I think this is where the Bookchin style of not actually trying to form an alternative state, but to set up alternative structures of governance which are based on direct democracy, and which are revolutionary in various dimensions, particularly in terms of the organization of the economy, and particularly in terms of gender relations. That this prospect, which I think has emerged in this region, is something which is a beacon to a lot of autonomous movements around the world. Curiously, about 2 weeks ago, I was in southern Chile talking to the Mapuche autonomous movement leaders. They were very well aware of what was happening in Rojava, and in fact started to look upon what is happening in Rojava as a model for how, in this case, an indigenous group within a rather hostile state could organize itself autonomously without necessarily fully abandoning or challenging the sovereignty of the state itself. So there is in this, I think, something very important going on to the degree that autonomy and autonomy movements are emerging in many parts of the world, from even Scotland. So I was suggesting to some Scottish colleagues that they might want to take this whole idea from Rojava and have a Scottish version of it, which would be rather very exciting, I think. So, but the main problem right now, as you can see, is this huge, huge problem of reconstruction. And I had very fortunate when I tried to get into Rojava, I drove down from Diyarbakir with the 2 architects from Diyarbakir who were going to help with the reconstruction. And there were a number of sort of questions I had of them, which I think are interesting. For instance, are you going to rebuild this place, Kobani, in the same way and reconstruct what it was before? Or are you going to actually transform it into a rather different kind of place, with more collective? And what's going to happen to private property rights? Are people going to come back and reclaim those property rights and just want to rebuild their apartment or their particular structure? What's going to happen to all of that? Because the destruction of the dimensions of it are such that I think to call forth the possibility for a reconstruction of property relations and rights and things of that kind, and I think you were beginning to talk a little bit about those, so if you have anything further you would like to say about that, I'd be delighted to hear. Because it's a reconstruction which is not simply a physical reconstruction, it has the possibility of this social and political reconstruction and the rebuilding of an alternative kind of the social order. And this is why I think that most of us here should be very, very concerned about what is happening, but at the same time to try to create a situation where the maximum liberty is given to the Kurdish movement, but as you say, it's a plurinational movement in Rojava itself, so that there will be the maximum possibility of flourishing in a different way, rather than being surrounded by hostile forces such as that, which is represented by the Turkish state, by what remains of the Syrian state, and what of course continues to be a problem, which is the fight with ISIS is not over. The fight with ISIS is still on. ISIS will try to come back if it possibly can, and to the degree that ISIS can be controlled, and I think your story about the sale of oil by ISIS through the border to Turkey has been one of the main forms in which ISIS seems to have funded itself, cutting off the funding possibilities for ISIS, as you have done, but still is Turkey going to facilitate the sale of black market oil from ISIS so that ISIS can get the money to support its initiatives? These are the sorts of questions which need to be there. So I don't want to take up any more time, but I want to say that I personally am in very, very strong support of what is being attempted here. Is it perfect? Almost certainly not. Never will be. But is it doing something which is absolutely incredibly imaginative, incredibly brave in the midst of terrifying destruction? I think this is something which we should all admire and do our best to support in whatever way we can. And I personally am very much committed to organising whatever support we can for what is happening in Rojava and what is happening to the Kurdish movement more generally. So I want to thank you for coming and telling us about this, and maybe invite you to make any more observations you might want to make given what I said.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your words, really. I'm so honored to be with Professor David Harvey here. If we have so many friends in all over the world, that time we will not be defeated. We will defeat the barbarian forces who are fighting the humanity value. About the rebuilding of Kobani, it's really not a physical rebuilding just to build a school or to build a housing or no. We start to build ecological society, that is very important. Depends on, from the economic side, cooperatives. This is important also. Now, starting now, agricultural cooperatives now in Kobani, just before many days they founded it, and they are working on it. This is one in Kobani, and we have a lot in the other cantons. In Afrin we have, and even in Al Jazeera we have. The system of cooperatives, it is a good system, so that it gives a way for all the people to do something. But even we have the private system, which people also who has something can do for their own private. This is also another system. But they should not be wealthy on the benefit of, to be benefit, and the others will be suffering. This is, we will not accept that. So we have so many laws for this. In Kobani, for the schools, building the school, and then we build also the education, new education system. Depends of morality, not only law. If you have law, you have to follow it. Either you like it or not. But when you have something moral, you will be convinced to do it. And this is is what we're having now in Rojava, to do it now. Depends of morality, the society, to build the society again. Our society have been corrupted 10 years back from the system of the Assad regime. Really, they corrupt the society. They corrupted in many ways. In making the women just like object to be, to sell it or buy it. So the women always, they used to make themselves as something to be sold, like this. So a woman not as a human being, she looks at herself. Something with sexual entertainment. Let us see. Now we are building another things. Replacing these things with something moral. Moral society, we are building it. Of course, we have many difficulties. Because 40 years of the Assad regime ruling Syria, not corrupting only the women, corrupting everything in all over Syria. Even the social fabric among all the Syrian people, among the Arabs, the Syriac, the Kurds, they even spoiled it in this system. We are now trying to replace it with the coexistence of these social fabrics. We are trying, at least in our region, to do it. Look at Rojava. You have the Syriac, we have the Muslim, you have the Yazidis. All together they are Syrian Christians. All together they are working. And look at another place in Syria. You can see the Sunni Muslims, they are fighting against the Christians. You can see the extremist Muslims, they are fighting the Yazidis. Where in Rojava, they are coexistence among each other. Yazidis people and the Syrian Christians and Muslims, Sunni. You will not find it in Rojava like this. We are trying to replace these things in our region of the coexistence of all these components of Rojava. And even in the social, in the economic side, and even in the basic services and so on. In Kobani, because it's all destroyed, we wish to build a model of the city we wish to be an ideal city really. It is a symbol for the new life for building of Kobani. But unfortunately, this needs support. We alone can't do it. The Kurds, they are helping us in all over the world. But you have seen what happened to the city. 70% of the city will be destroyed. I can't build it alone. And it is the responsibility of all the people in all over the world, not our responsibility only. In Kobani we defeat really the barbarian forces. In Kobani, humanity wins there. The will of people to win there. And the coexistence wins there. The equality of genders wins there. So for that, I think it is a responsibility for all the people in all over the world to support Kobani in order to make it an ideal city, a model for all maybe it will be the city which all over the people, they will be going and seeing this city, what happened. Some of these cities, which we have a very big fighting where, and we lost many of martyrs there, it has become for us a holy places. We are going to make it like a museum for Kobani. And it will be a big museum.